Welcome to the Real Estate Association weekly meeting sponsored by the Center of Real Estate at California State University, Fullerton.
Thank you for being here. I am Mario, the Vice President. Our President is out at a very important dinner. I'll be joining him shortly for SIOR. They made a great donation to us recently to the Cal State Fullerton, so we'll be doing that later this evening. Without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce to you our speaker today. It is a wonderful person, Cory Seagal. He is in the financing lending sector of the industry. He's done over hundreds of millions of private lending financing loans for commercial property. So please, if you don't mind coming up here, Mr. Cory, round of applause. Apple juice and cookies. This is like what I bring to my daughter's soccer game, so this is perfect. Thank you.
We have pizza coming.
Yeah, pizza? Perfect. By show of hands, who was here last time? Okay, so you guys, Angela, what's up, man? So if you even know my story, I'm Cory Seagal, S&L Capital Group. My last name is Seagal, so I'm the S. My business partner's last name is Ladisaw, he's the L. We're not very creative. That's just what I want to say about that. We own a private lending company, and so I'll explain a little bit about that and kind of that industry in comparison to maybe what you are aware of in the financing world. But I know that most of you are focusing on commercial real estate interests. Is that right? Or by show of hands, who's interested in commercial versus, yeah, raise your hand if you're interested in commercial. Okay. Anybody in residential have an interest in residential? Okay, so it's split, 50-50. I like it. We do both types of transactions. We finance investment loans for residential investors, people who fix and flip properties. I'm sure on Instagram you see a lot of folks who are buying short-term rentals and doing BRRRR strategies. If you're familiar with BRRRR, where you buy, rehab, rent, renovate, repeat, it's some sort of, everything needs an acronym these days, right? On the commercial side of things, we do asset-based commercial bridge loans. Drive down any street in Orange County or Los Angeles, you see a dilapidated, distressed property that doesn't have a tenant, multifamily that needs maintenance. A lot of times banks will have problems financing that type of property. And so we can come in and finance those deals, allow an owner to go and renovate or improve the condition of that property. And then they go to a bank and say, hey, now my property looks really, really nice. So can I get long-term debt on it? So we'll go into a little bit of that to kind of explain from a high level what's going on. The commercial market right now is in a real interesting spot. A lot of times people get into commercial with an exit strategy of refinancing into long-term debt, and they want to improve the condition of the property and increase rents to then get more attractive debt down the road. With all the stuff that's been going on in the market, and with rates increasing so drastically in 2023, there's just a lot of properties and a lot of loans right now that are in a big deal of hurt because you can't literally raise rents enough to cover where the interest rates are now compared to when they bought the property. And there are a lot of smart people when interest rates are low. Everybody's a genius, right? When appreciation and values are going up just naturally in the market without doing anything to the property, you're a smart investor. But when interest rates start going up and appreciation kind of levels off, you really have to be smart at what you do. And so a lot of those smart investors are now becoming coaches in the real estate space. And that's a red flag, if you ask me. But a little bit about me. I went to Cal State Fullerton, graduated in January 2009. My business partner also graduated, I think in 2010 or 11, so he's a couple years younger than me. We met here. So any opportunity that we have to be involved with Cal State Fullerton, we really try to take advantage of. I was in this building, not to try to age myself even more, the very first semester that it was open. I took one class that I ended up dropping because it seemed really hard for my last semester. I didn't really want to do that. It was a financial planning class. So I've barely seen this building. There was no Starbucks here. It was just kind of a brand new building, which is amazing to see. So the fact that you all are sitting in this room, look and learn, and kind of expand yourselves as young professionals, I think is something that really sets you apart. I should have taken more advantage of the programs that Cal State Fullerton had to offer. I did not. So in a weird way, this is how I'm kind of getting back into it. So from a financing perspective, who is interested in like the lending side of the business? Does anybody want to be in the commercial lending space or the residential lending space? Show of hands. Any idea what you want to do? Like,
I'm a finance major, so just but I'm also interested in real estate, so that kind of intrigues me a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, but that would be interesting to me, that space.
yeah. Well, good news, you don't have to have it all figured out.
Uh,
You know, a lot of times we think when you're getting through with your last couple of years in college, you think you should know exactly what you want to do. A lot of pressure on you guys to do that. I went through a number of careers before I ended up starting, my business here. You said you wanted to do some finance stuff. Is that right? Anybody else raise their hand? Just kind of trying to gauge what we're interested in here. Yeah, go ahead. What are you thinking about?
Probably loan officer.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Like residential mortgages?
Most likely.
Okay. That's definitely good to get into it right now. It's a tough time to be in that business with rates where they are, but if you can get into it now, you'll be able to kind of establish a book of business and when things take off. In the private lending space, there are subsectors of private lending, right? When you're talking about regular home mortgages or bank loans from Chase or your institutional Fannie Freddie CMBS loans, all of those loans are very restrictive in the essence of like requirements. So is the property performing in a commercial bank loan situation? What's the cash flow? What's the value of the property? There's a debt service coverage ratio. Does your property generate X amount of income, and does the mortgage payment come in less than that? And if it doesn't, ultimately what ends up happening, your loan amount gets cut down, okay? On the residential side, you have debt to income ratios. You have, if you're buying an investment property that is a rental, a 1 to 4 unit rental, you have the same debt service coverage ratio requirements that you have. A bank, when you buy a property for yourself to live in, if it's a first time home buyer program or a conventional type of loan, you can bring in very little money down. 5% or so, 3.5% in some cases. When you buy an investment property that you have no intention on living in, typically banks and more traditional financing will require you to come in with 25% down. So you have a higher barrier of entry if you're wanting to get into an investment property when dealing with a bank. Same goes with the commercial side of things. Owner user properties usually qualify for what's called like SBA loans, small business administration loans. Lots of paperwork, great program. It allows you as a business owner to go and buy a building, buy a property that you're going to occupy over 51% of with very little money down. So these are programs that the government has, whether it's a homeowner loan or whether it's a commercial loan, that really is trying to promote the idea that you can make your dream a reality. The question becomes, what if you don't qualify? What if the property doesn't qualify? What if you want to buy a commercial building and you're not going to occupy 50% of it? You're going to occupy 20% of it. Where do you go from there, right? That's where the private money side of things, the asset-based lending side of things will really come into play for those of you that are interested in this commercial real estate or residential real estate space. It will open up opportunities for you to access debt that is needed to be able to buy a property or to refinance out of a loan that might be coming due. So within that private lending space, there are branches, okay? We'll go over them very kind of surface level, but if you have any questions, obviously I want you guys to jump in, guys and gals, to be able to, oh, look, you brought my pizza. Just kidding. So there are debt funds. Is everybody familiar with what a fund is? Anybody not familiar? That's probably a better way to ask that. Who does not know what a fund is?
A lot of people that aren't raising their hand don't know.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So a fund is an investment vehicle where, let's say everybody in this room wanted to participate in a fund, and I am the operator of the fund. My fund will say, I want to invest in loans against multifamily properties at a loan to value of 60% in Southern California that need value add or renovations to improve value. So me, as the operator of the fund, I'm going to lay out in a PPM, which is pretty much a document that explains what the criteria for the fund is, what we're going to attack as an investment. Now, all of you put in $100,000, okay? Accredited investors will put money into the fund, and as long as I'm identifying investment opportunities for that fund that meet the criteria that I've explained and disclosed to you, I have the freedom to invest that money into those projects. So we pool those monies together, so we have a larger amount of money to then pool. A fund is very appealing because it allows you to have access to a larger amount of capital. It allows investors like you, instead of taking your $100,000 and investing in one deal by yourself, you invest in the fund and the fund invests in 100 deals. So that's diversification, right? We lay out what type of return is expected of you or expected of the fund. And then anything above that return is split between the investors and the operator, right? Yes, sir.
So it's similar to an index fund?
It's similar to an index fund, except the index funds are made up of stocks, right? So those individual stocks, if you just replace those stocks with properties, I guess, then you would. But yeah, I mean, the stocks it's not quite like that.
Like same idea.
Same kind of idea, right? So there are funds that you can be a part of, or you can operate as a real estate professional to identify opportunities. There are things called trust deed investors in the state of California. My company runs with trust deed investors. That's our structure. So we don't have a fund of money that we have to utilize. We have individual investors. So this investor likes single family resident deals. That's a fix and flip. He only wants to put money into the deal for less than 12 months. And he wants to make sure that the owner of the property, whoever's buying, that we're lending money to, is going to add value by renovating the property. That's very specific. And then this investor wants to do commercial deals. So he wants to do a multifamily transaction at a lower loan to value. And then so on and so forth. Somebody else likes industrial deals. Somebody else likes rental properties, single family resident rental properties. And our job, and my business partner and I's job, is to identify those transactions and put this investor with that transaction and that investor with that transaction. So we don't sit on a pool of money, but we have the money available to us, if that makes sense. And my job with the company is to be kind of like the front-facing person for originations. So my goal is to meet as many people as I can who are investing in real estate, who are a mortgage broker on the residential side, who run a capital markets and debt team on the commercial side. What we're doing as a private lending company is not something that everybody needs all the time. A lot of times people are looking for residential loans for properties that they want to live in. We don't do those types of loans. A lot of times people are looking for commercial property loans that are 15, 25, or 30 years in term. We don't do those kind of loans. So the goal for me and for my business partner is to try and get out and meet as many people as possible so that when the transaction that fits our criteria comes up, that's what they think of. They think of calling us. The other side of the private lending industry that has kind of blown up over the last 10 to 15 years is institutional lending or secondary market stuff. This is especially common in California. And effectively, you would want to think about it as if there's a back end of money that will fund all of our transactions as long as those transactions meet a certain amount of criteria. Minimum credit score, reserves in a bank account, different pricing for different loan to values, different types of transaction, whether it's a rental property or a fix and flip. And that big allocation of money will then fund the transaction, and they will package up 100 of those loans and sell them to Wall Street effectively. And what we've kind of found out throughout the years is that it's the same big banks that you can think of that are buying these tranches of loans, and they are kind of exploiting their ability to provide a lot of capital to a market at really aggressive pricing, because that's a different risk tolerance for them than it is for most people. So those are kind of the three, I would call them, main private lending channels, right? You have your debt funds, your trustee investors, and your secondary market lenders. And we fall into that trustee investing side. So that's how we are structured. So any questions so far about that? Yeah.
How many trustee investors do you have? Like is it like 20? Is it like 10?
I mean, it really comes down to like actively we have about anywhere from 25 to 30 that have outstanding loans. A lot of times the trusting investors, they could be a company themselves. And so we have a few investors that own and operate family offices. So we may not be a fund, but they are a fund and they can fund the transaction through our brokerage.
You just charge a flat rate, like a finder's fee, or you take a percentage of what they make?
So great question. In the loan business, there's origination, doc drawing fees, all of that kind of stuff that you charge on the front end. And then the goal is to try and charge a servicing spread. So if I'm yielding an investor 10% or 9% and I'm charging a borrower 10% interest only, that 1% variance would be something as like a servicing revenue, right? So the goal is to try and get your portfolio as big as you can, while you can also create that spread from interest payment to the investor and interest payment to the borrower to have just a little bit of a buffer there. And that creates a secondary kind of residual income on a monthly basis. The interesting part about it, then we'll get to you, Angelo, is when you're working with, let's say, fix and flip investors, the spread doesn't really make a difference. So if you're going to buy a property, renovate it, and sell it in 4 months, even if you have a 1% spread on that money, that 1% is annualized since it's interest only. And so the amount of money you can really turn over before that loan gets paid off is kind of nominal. So in those situations, you get more aggressive on pricing with borrowers because you want to earn the business and not try to like price yourself out of the deal just to make $100 more a month or whatever it ends up being. Hopefully that answers your question. Angelo.
Could you paint me a picture of how you meet your investors, like from start to finish, and then also?
Want me to draw it? No, I'm just kidding.
No, like like a visualization, and do you find yourself like having challenges getting them to want to provide you capital, and if so, how do you overcome that obstacle?
I would say the easiest way to find investors right now, especially, is by working with trade associations that focus strictly on the private lending space. So there is an association that my business partner Brad is president of, and it's called California Mortgage Association. And it's an advocacy group that kind of drills down compliance, laws, legislation that are probably well intended by the politicians that we have in this great state of California for the mortgage industry, that have negative effects that those people who are not involved in real estate don't really think about. But when you get into those rooms, now you're in the room with 100 people that are private lenders, right? And so if you're trying to get in front of an individual who is wealthy, that's really difficult, right? You can look through public record from a title agent or a title rep to find out if there are private beneficiaries. Does anybody know what a beneficiary is? What's that?
Someone who benefits from the investment.
Okay, so take it a little bit further. Do you know? You want to take a crack at it? There you go. Ding, ding, ding. So a beneficiary in the state of California, when you get a deed of trust that's recorded against a property, if you take a loan out from Bank of America shows as the beneficiary. So when you're looking at public record in California, you can see who the lender is on every transaction. So if you wanted to find private beneficiaries, individual names, LLCs, whatever it may be, you can get a title rep to kind of farm a market, and then you can get that individual's name, and then you can use AI or some sort of skip tracing to find those individuals that are doing private mortgages, right? For us, we got into this business, and I was in 2012, so it's been a while. AI was not a thing, right? I mean, it was definitely a different time. So a lot of it back then was relationship-based, where you would meet people at conferences, you would be introduced to them just at regular networking meetups, and then once you kind of get your reputation going, they'll introduce you to somebody who introduces you to somebody who introduces you to somebody. So I don't have a magic way to kind of how we meet our investors, but a lot of them have been with us for going on a decade, and they stay with you because their loans performed, right? If the borrowers that we're identifying are making payments and selling properties, our investors like us. If the borrowers are defaulting on loans and not making payments, that investor doesn't want to do deals with us anymore. So as with anything else, real estate's a very reputational business. So hopefully that helps. Yes, sir.
What's the minimum investment size that you require of an investor?
So that's not like a standard answer for us. So what we do on the trustee investing side, and there are different companies that do different things. So we do what's called whole note investing. So one investor lends on one deal. We don't try to split that loan up. Let's say it's a $500,000 loan. We don't try to split that loan up with 10 investors at $50,000. That style is called fractionalizing. And that's very common in the industry too. I can't sleep at night if we're waiting on investor number 10 to decide whether or not they want to put their 50 grand in. We've been very fortunate enough to have whole note investments. Our loans usually, they can dip down in some markets to $150,000, $100,000, depending on the need, but usually it's more than that. So that's kind of the best way that I can answer that. Yeah. I don't know where I left off, but so our business is very much private. It's private investors that are not banks. It is family offices that want exposure to real estate. The benefit for an investor on the lending side is that they can get a really nice rate of return on their investment with monthly cash flow, which is the loan payments, secured by a real asset, which is a very big deal in a volatile economy, right? When I was graduating in 2008, 2009, it's probably one of the worst times to graduate because the financial markets just completely fell apart. Well, and in California even, property prices went down quite a bit. The difference between California and some other markets is it took longer for those prices to go down. They went down, but it took 12, 15 months for that full 30% or so in most major metropolitan areas in California to really get discounted off of that price. But I will say, if I'm lending money against property and my loan is 50% of that property, and I can get a 10% plus or minus rate of return, even if the property loses 30% of value, my investment is safe. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So you're talking about risk mitigation. You're talking about different ways and vehicles to invest to make a decent amount of return on your money. And a lot of the times our investors come from a more active participation in real estate. So if we have an investor whose family had owned multifamily properties since the 60s. And in the 90s, they sold all of them. They had thousands of doors. So now, instead of them owning the property and dealing with trash, toilets, and tenants, the beautiful tease of owning multifamily properties, now they just lend money. And in place of collecting monthly rent, they're getting paid monthly mortgage payments. So it's very similar. They have familiarity with real estate. They're not dealing with necessarily the day-to-day issues of owning a property, but they are realizing cash flow on a monthly basis. So the lending side is a very interesting side to be on because it's available to anybody, and anybody can do it with money. Any questions? Yeah.
How many deals do you do a year, and how often does someone default on a loan? And are you liable?
I am always, in California, yeah, we're always liable,
So
you know?
even just being kind of the middleman in the, do you take them, so if someone defaults, there's a property there, right? So
Yeah.
do you have to take the property, or does the investor take the property?
Great question. So, first part of the question is we try to do between 75 and 100 transactions a year. This year we'll come up a little bit short, but we're doing more commercial deals. The busiest year I had, it was only residential, and we did like 138 deals. How many defaults? So in California, there's notice of default, so there's a default. 90 days later, there's notice of sale. And then after that, that's when the foreclosure happens on non-owner occupied properties, right? The foreclosure process for an owner-occupied property is different. So we only do non-owner occupied properties. And it's not automatic. So that's the other part about dealing with mortgages and dealing in a business environment in California that's very consumer friendly, is the harder you are on clients, the more legal issues you might open yourself up to. So To answer your question, we've had 5 loans, I believe, since 2017 when we started our firm that have kind of been in that default situation. All of them were cured before we had to go to foreclosure. We had, I think one of those had a sale date, but we can postpone the sale date. So they had something working to pay us off. So we didn't actually have to do that. We kept postponing that sale date, and then they refinanced with whatever they needed to do. To answer your next part of the question, the beneficiary is the one who takes the property back. And they will set a minimum reserve price through the auction. And if the auction does not yield that price, then they get the property back. And once they get the property back, foreclosure laws have changed in the last few years. There has to be a period of time that you have to wait to make sure nobody else comes out of the woodworks and says, oh, wait a second, I own that property, what's going on? But once they get that clean bill of health at that point in time, they can then market and sell that property or hold on to it as a rental or whatever it may be. We try not to do the riskiest of loans because we don't really like going through the whole process.
In those scenarios, did they lose? Did the investors lose money or not?
Our investor?
Yeah, those 5.
Well, so the one that I'm thinking of in particular depends on your definition of lose, you know? Like, so.
I guess a break even would be lose, right?
No, so it wasn't quite that either though. But here's the thing, let's say you're charging a certain amount of interest rate. When the borrower goes into default, that interest rate goes up. So you haven't made your payment, same with like credit cards. If you haven't made your payment, now you go from a 10% rate to 18%. But you're not making payments, so all of that 18% is accruing. But that 18% also gives you flexibility to try and get out of the loan. So if they're working on a refinance, let's say in this situation, and they're short to close by 20 grand on $1 million loan, you can shave off the default interest as the investor if you choose to get paid off, right? So technically, did they lose? Yeah, but did they get all of their principal and interest back that they were really owed at the beginning? Yes. So it's kind of a, no, they didn't really lose, but they lost the full potential of that. That can happen even in a debt fund, right? In a debt fund, you can choose to waive that default interest, or you can collect that default interest, and now all of us have made more money and we're happier, right? But it's kind of a slippery type of situation in California because borrowers can file BK, they can do a lot of things that, even though it's a business purpose loan, stall tactics and what's it worth to you? Do you want that capital back so you can reinvest, or do you really want to try and get every last squeeze of juice out of that orange? So, do you have a question?
Yeah, so when you're prospecting for a client, I guess like in the ways you do,
Mhm.
what type of investor are you looking for? Is it like multifamily homes? Is it like just a mixture of like both, like even like commercial buildings? Like what is the grand size, or like even like from the smallest to the largest size of investors?
Yeah. So I work with, I'll give you the whole answer there. So I work with investors who fix and flip properties in San Bernardino and Riverside. And so those price points are kind of on the smaller side, like $400,000 purchases and below, I would say. They do about 10 to 15 deals a year. We go all the way up to working with other groups that are investing in the same kind of 1 to 4 residential in San Diego, where those price points now are getting up to like $700,000 to $1 million. Once we get over that $1 million threshold, we're not really big into luxury fix and flips per se. So $1.5 million is kind of where we like to cap out our residential fix and flip business. Not because the properties are not that great, it's just that most people who are in the investment space really underestimate what it takes to get done to sell a property for $2.5 million. Not just from the quality of work, but the dollar amounts that you really need to spend on the materials and the finishes, but the holding time. Naturally, you can look this up. Luxury properties take a lot longer to sell. And if you're in that type of project with an interest payment of $12,000 or $15,000 a month, those are the deals that have the highest probability in our eyes to kind of get hairy at some point in time. So on the residential side, we kind of focus on that $1.5 million price point and below. Pivoting to commercial, so the client type that we want to see are investors who are actively investing in residential, who want to do multiple deals in a year, and who have access to capital. Because when we do a loan, we either need them to come in with money, whether it's 20% of the purchase price or whatever it may be, or we need them to have their own set of investors that can bring in that 20% of money, right? So repeat borrowers is really what we focus on that side. On the commercial side, about 95% of our business comes from commercial brokers. So when you're working on commercial deals like multifamily or industrial or retail space or small office space, it's amazing to see how different it is on that side of things. Property buyers put a lot of trust in their commercial brokers. And the commercial broker will help them identify properties, but they'll also help them structure the debt. So their hand is in multiple cookie jars there. It's kind of like a full service agency. So on the commercial side, we're looking for commercial brokers who are regularly listing and selling and helping people buy multifamily, industrial, retail, office space. And we're also looking for those property owners directly. It's just by the nature of the business, a majority of what we do is through brokers on that side of things. Yeah.
Do you have any relationships with owners that are liquidating their real estate assets through the 1031 exchange?
So we have relationships with them in the sense that when they're in that part of the process and they have to do the second leg, usually they come to us when their timelines are getting constrained. Is everybody familiar with 1031 exchanges? Yeah?
No.
So, no. Everybody's nodding though.
No, they understand the concept, but they don't quite understand the time press. and
Yes.
What the squeeze is that
So
is creating the opportunity for you.
So a 1031 exchange is an exchange of a like-kinded property, which is a very misleading term because they actually don't have to be very much alike, but a like-kinded property. There are a lot of caveats and carve-outs. So you sell a property, you take the proceeds and the profit from that property and you buy something new and you save your tax basis. Effectively, I know I'm being recorded, I'm not a CPA or an attorney, just want to say that. But you're supposed to identify the property that you're going to buy, and I think it's within 45 days, sometimes 90 in some situations. The problem becomes a conventional bank like Chase, or they have great commercial loans, that's why I keep bringing them up, or any real long-term debt is going to take a longer period of time to close that loan. So if you don't identify your property and then close the property by the deadline, you don't save the money on the taxes. So what ends up happening is you've identified your property, you go to the bank to get them to approve your loan. They cannot close the loan by the deadline. That's when they come to us. They come to us and they go, hey, can you close this deal in 15 days? And they save the money on the taxes. And then once they save that tax money, they can, after we fund the loan, go back to the bank and have them pay us off. So, but direct relationships with those people, we're usually brought in at the end when they need kind of exection on that transaction.
That's a really smart method to use our money to close it.
I mean, listen, that's what I'm here for. No, just kidding. You had a question?
So do you think you could elaborate a little bit more on what a like property is? Or?
What a like kind of property is? Yeah. So here's a perfect example. Your family bought a 10-unit property in Los Angeles in 1975. At the time, it was worth 68 cents. No, just kidding. It was worth, 50 grand. They've had tenants in there forever. Now today, it's worth $3 million. So they want to sell that property. They have $2.95 million of profit in that deal. So they sell it for $3 million. They can identify a multifamily property in Huntington Beach, right? And that property is worth $3 million. If they bought that property for $3 million today without a 1031 exchange, their taxes will be based off of the new basis, which is $3 million. If they keep their property in LA, their tax basis is based off of probably more than 50 over however many years, but their tax basis is so much lower. So they're only paying a fraction of what they should be in property taxes. And so you can not get taxed on the $2.95 million of profit if you roll it into a like kind of property. I believe. Give or take, right?
Yeah.
Give or take. So that's what you mean. Like kind of property would mean like similar in debt, similar type of property actually, similar cash flowing type of asset. I don't think it even has to be a similar location. It can be pretty much anywhere nowadays. So
if you think about it, it is misleading when you say like for like, in that it can be a single family home that you now trade into an office building, multifamily, medical building. What's really are these depreciable assets that are tied to real estate. That's all like is.
Yeah. And you're effectively just trying to have a tax strategy, so you don't get hit with a huge bill after you profit off of this transaction. That's effectively what it is. Somebody, yeah.
So you talked about how you find lenders, but how do you qualify like the person who gets the loan for building? Do you come in and look at I would imagine you come in and look at the property, but do you go through the owner's finances or the company it's set under? How do you verify all that information?
So this will, and my goal is to not just tell you kind of like what we do also, but I can kind of explain it in like those different channels of private money types of stuff. So for us, we're considered what's called an asset-based lender. So where a bank may lend you 75, 80% to buy something, we're going to be less than that. So we'll be on a commercial building around 60, maybe 65% if it's a multifamily deal that has some value add, maybe 70, probably not, but maybe. But the general reason we are lower is because we're mainly focused on the asset and the performance of that asset. So instead of us looking at tax returns, instead of us requiring a certain debt service coverage ratio, instead of us requiring a minimum credit score, we take a larger equity position. So there's a bigger buffer for you to mess up effectively and for us to be safe. Bless you. And for us to be safe. So when we look at a borrower for qualification, of course we want to know if you've done this before. If you have not done this type of transaction before, that's okay. But it helps. We want to know how liquid you are. What money do you have in the bank that you can use to make payments or bring in to purchase this property? And then from our loan amount will never exceed a threshold in which we feel like it's overextended, right? So on a commercial deal, if we're at 60%, the reason is we want a bank to be able to refinance and pay our 60% off with no problem, right? If we're talking about a residential property that's a fixed to hold, a burst strategy, right? We want to be less than about 65 or 70% of the after repaired value or the stabilized value, because when you go to a bank, they're going to give you 75% on that asset. So I don't want my loan to be higher than what they will lend you. So if that answers your question.
Addendum to that, so you loan on the after value. What if the landlord or the owner of that property doesn't do any TIs or any improvements to the building?
So on the residential side, we'll have a construction fund control setup,
Okay.
right? And so part of your loan is set aside for you to do the work on the property, and then you effectively draw down on that account to get reimbursed for that money. On the commercial side, we personally don't fund CapEx, but if we did, it would be similar. You would have that money set aside. Now, why is that money set aside is a great question. A lot of times people will say in our space, the money set aside so the lender can finish the project if they foreclose. False, not what it's actually there for. It is there to be a principal pay down of the loan. So if you have a $500,000 loan with us and $100,000 set aside, but you decide to do none of the work and then you default on the property, that $100,000 set aside will be credited towards the loan amount, and now you only owe $400,000, which means through foreclosure, I have a higher likelihood of getting this property sold for $400,000, using round numbers, right? Than I do for $500,000, right? So that's kind of that. Yeah, but good to see you too, Sebastian. How you doing, man?
For your fix and flips, I know, a lot of times you guys want to go close and everything. What's your timeline for, maybe your quickest close ever, or what's your usual?
Oh man, quickest close ever was like 3 days. So, it's real fast. Usually that's if another lender kind of blows up at the finish line, right? And just doesn't have their stuff in order. So in those situations, we have a full file, we have an appraisal, we just have to do a property walkthrough, so that can be quick. Our average funding timeline is probably a better thing to kind of promote, because what we do every day is about 11 days on the residential side, 11 business days. So again, things move pretty quickly. But that's why people would elect to go with a private mortgage as opposed to trying to go to a bank for a 30-day close. Because if it was apples to apples, they would take a lower cost conventional than they would with us. But especially on the investment property side, most of the time buyers are competing against all cash offers. And so how do you compete in all-cash offer? You have to have similar all-cash timelines. But even if I had $500,000 today to buy the property down the street, I'm still going to go see the property. I'm still going to go and put together a renovation budget to make sure I know what's going on with the property. I might have a plumber come out and inspect the lines. I might have a roofer. So you're still going to do your due diligence. That's why about 10 or so days is pretty competitive when you're talking about a loan compared to all cash.
Two-part question. Do you find that you do most of your lending on fix and flips? And then the other part of the question is, do you care whether or not it's vacant or occupied?
So I'll answer the first part, or the second part first. We really prefer it to be vacant, especially in California. Here we go. Again, not to bash on the old state that we live in, but different counties and cities have different eviction laws and requirements. Some rent-controlled areas are more strict than others. So a lot of times we get approached with clients who are like, the seller wants to remain for 30 days while they find a property. And it's, as an investor, you're still a human being. You know, you're like, I don't want to kick these people out. But the problem becomes like, if they don't find a place in 30 days, you still have to pay my mortgage, right? You still have to pay for your loan. And if you can't add that value, like you're not improving your loan to value scenario. So if you have to go and get a refinance, you're not going to get the loan paid off in some cases. The refinance on a fix and flip style loan only works when you add value. Because if I lend you 80% of the purchase price and you don't do anything to the property, you're not getting an 80% loan to value refi. And even if you did, you still have to bring in closing costs and impounds and escrow and insurance, right? So you're going to bring money in on that refi. So I wouldn't say we're required, because we've had 3, 5, 7 day right to remain type of situations for the seller of the property to remain there, but we really strongly prefer it to be delivered vacant. The first part of your question, from a transaction standpoint, about 65% of the number of deals that we do are residential transactions. So about 35 or 40% are commercial. The volume of loans is about 50-50 though. Commercial deals are generally higher price points, and so that's kind of where we split right now. And we're trying as much as we possibly can to do as many more commercial deals as we can than residential.
What do you find that type of client does in general?
For commercial?
Yeah.
Like 90%, 95% of our business is through commercial brokers, right? And so commercial brokers who are either working on like capital markets and debt teams, they have a slew of investors that they work with for a variety of reasons, right? They go to credit unions, they go to banks, they go to debt funds, they go to construction lenders. We just want to be that bridge lending part of their operation. And so when a bridge loan request comes up, then they would send it to us. There are some new kind of AI data tools out there that we recently onboarded with, where we're going to get more in front of property owners directly. And if we work directly with them, they'll save money because they're not paying two kind of brokers involved on that deal. And so we're trying that out here, but a majority of it would be mortgage brokers or commercial brokers. So we go. Any other questions here? Yeah.
The question that they all want to know, that are afraid to ask, is how much money are you making?
Oh man. Not enough. Never is enough. I got 2 kids and a mortgage and a HELOC. No. Daycare. I mean, I think in this business you can really set the bar for what you want to do. I mean, without getting into specifics, like 6 figures is not hard to do. Not hard to do at all. Running a business in California is unbelievably expensive. When you're talking about, we have a processor. The amount of reporting that you have to do, even when you're not doing the reporting activity, is wild. But you can make easily 6 figures in this business on one transaction, frankly. So that's the best best I'll answer that. But yeah, I would just say, yeah, go ahead.
How did the pandemic influence your business? Like, with growing a smaller percentage of
So the question was, how did the pandemic affect my business? I had to wear diapers every day for like 3 months. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, initially I thought that it was going to be the hardest thing ever. And for the first 2 or 3 months, everybody just kind of stalled out because nobody knew what was going to happen. It ended up being one of our best years at the time because interest rates went down so much that there was a feeding frenzy. It helped our business a lot. It created a lot of bad habits for real estate investors, though, because what ended up happening is if a client had a budget of X on a project and a timeline of 3 or 4 or 5 months, what you find out in this business is most of the time clients overspend 20%, 30% of their initial budget. They also go longer on timeline, whether it's in their control or it's not. The thing that really hurt people at that time that they're only realizing now, it didn't hurt at that point in time, it was quite the opposite at that time, was the market was so crazy that there was appreciation of like 3 to 5% per month. It was like a wild situation. So if you spent more money and you spent more time, your property went up in value even more. And then people would sell and they would say, everybody loves my property, can you believe this? And then you would fast forward to 2023 and they would spend more money and they would spend more time and they would get absolutely crushed because interest rates were going up and people weren't really buying, and they're like, I don't know why people don't love my property. And it's like, no, the sentiment in the market during COVID was that if I don't buy this house, I'm never gonna have a house. Interest rates will never be like this. That's why there were 20 offers in the first weekend. So long story short would be, it really helped our business because as long as clients were able to identify good opportunities, they could overpay and still make money, and we could still get the loan.
Were there clients or investors that kind of defaulted because of
Not at that time, not at that time. What you're seeing on the commercial side right now is, I wouldn't say 2020 so much, but if you bought a multifamily deal with a high leverage loan, which is was very common, you're trying to turn over every unit, renovate each unit, new kitchens, new cabinets, flooring, make it into a better class of a building. A lot of times, there are lenders who do this. We don't, but they would do like a 75% of the purchase price and then fund the entire renovation costs. Well, if you look at that on a 20-unit apartment building, that puts your like total loan amount well above your purchase price, well above it. Okay. The problem becomes things take longer, they cost more, and then interest rates went up. If you're talking about if somebody bought a property in 2022 or 2023. Expecting rates to come back down, they haven't really come back down. So there are a lot of maturing loans and loans that we see right now that we get requests to refinance that are simply over leveraged. What happens in the commercial space is the income of your property drives your loan amount. When interest rates go up and your interest and your income of the property may go up, but it's not going up that fast, your mortgage payment becomes that much higher. So you don't have the income to cover that payment. That's really what people are having trouble with right now, because they have so much debt on the property and not as much income to cover a 6% rate or a 5.5% or whatever the rates are at that point in time. So I think there's still some hurt in the space for that to be worked out, and we'll see how that ends up happening. Yeah.
Since you work with people that are looking to like renovate and flip a property, like more of like a short-term hold, do you offer like interest-only loans? Or?
Yeah, all of our loans are interest only.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah, and we write them for 12, 24, 36 months. On the residential side, typically those are 12-month terms. I always joke with clients, like, you don't want to make more than 12 months payments. You want to pay us off in a very quick amount of time. On the commercial side, we offer slightly longer terms because it just takes longer to execute that plan.
Yeah.
And get rents up or wait for somebody to move out to renovate that unit or whatever it may be. But all of our loans are interest only with a balloon payment on the back end. And yeah.
Do you have any kind of bridge product that allows homeowners to not have to sell their house first before buying another one?
Why do you ask that? So there's something in the space called consumer bridge. I am just wrapped up my NMLS licensing classes and just got to sit for the exam, and then we will start offering that. The way that a consumer bridge loan works, probably shouldn't say this on camera, but whatever, because I'm not licensed to do it, but I'm not quoting pricing. So that's that. They put a lien against the property you're trying to sell, and they'll cross that with the property you're trying to buy, And then once you sell that first asset, it kind of works its way to pay off the loan. So we get approached with that quite a bit. And because we're not NMLS licensed right now, even when we refer it out, we can't get compensated for it. It's just a different licensing. And so we're actually working on getting that worked out right now. Any other questions for me? No? Yeah, so very happy to be back. I think, thank you very much for having me again. I love this place.
Round of applause.
And yeah.
Okay. Cory, would you allow anybody to come and shadow you for a day?
Yeah, I'm a very boring person to shadow. I just spend most of my time on the phone. But yeah, just reach out. I know Anthony has reached out to try and get that going as well. We can absolutely go through kind of a day. I think we have growth plans here towards the end of the year. It's got to hit some milestones on our side and looking to kind of add to the sales team. So if you're interested in slanging loans, let's do it. Let's figure it out, and we can kind of go from there. But yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. I have cards here if anybody needs them. Anyone wants them, go for it.
Once again, a round of applause for Cory. Next week, please first of all come on down. We do have pizza. Next week we have a real estate developer coming in. He has experience, almost 40 years of experience in both residential and commercial. Great topic. Come on down. I know a lot of you guys do want to do development. I know personally I do. But thank you again, Cory. I think we also have 2 tours with the Irvine Company coming up. It's October 31st and November 14th. We're doing 2 property tours, which is they'll learn how to assess it, and great opportunity. But thank you guys all for coming out. I know a lot of you have to get to class, but please steal some pizza, steal some snacks, and thank you guys for coming out.